Welcome to Baltic Ways. I'm your host, Ben Gardner-Gill. Today, we're talking about integration through art, documentary, and dance in Estonia. Over 100,000 Ukrainian refugees have come to Estonia at some point since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Of those, tens of thousands remain in the country, building communities of their own and integrating with local Estonians. For many, art is an important assertion of Ukrainian identity, but also a bridge to their new neighbors. To learn more about that, our interviewee today is Parker Watt, an American scholar and documentary filmmaker who recently completed a U.S. Fulbright research grant in Estonia by making a series of documentary short films covering the lives and work of Ukrainian artists in Estonia. Through the AABS Balmanis Grant for Creative Projects, Watt's videos were premiered in September 2025 at Vabamu Museum of Occupations and Freedom in Tallinn. Watt received his Bachelor of Arts in International Relations and a minor in Slavic Languages and Literature from Stanford University. Parker, thanks so much for joining Baltic Ways.
Thank you so much for having me, Ben. It's going to be an exciting time to talk a little bit about this project that I've been working on for a year and dive into the Baltic region, which I've come to love.
Let's actually start there. How did you come to love the Baltic region? I understand you, like me, have actually no roots in the Baltic states, and so we each come to our love of the Baltic for different reasons. Tell me a little bit about yours.
Yeah, so at Stanford, I had been someone that was involved in international affairs. I will say, like many people might have approached the former Soviet space, actually, from a language standpoint. I had chosen Russian initially as a language at Stanford. This really stemmed from an interest in Central Asia, actually, was my initial jump into the language. And then as my knowledge of the post-Soviet space grew, I started to become interested in the Baltics and first got to go visit Latvia. And that really shifted my interests. And really, I discovered this region that was rich in itself. And my previous academic endeavors took a backseat, or they shifted. And I ultimately ended up taking a lot of Baltic history classes at Stanford and was fortunate to go on an internship to Estonia 2 years ago, where I was in Tartu working at Šūte Institute, the Political Studies Institute there, and really just got introduced to Estonia as a culture and fell in love with the town that I was in, the people that I was meeting, and wanted to find a way to get back there. And simultaneously also was being introduced to people at the Ukraine Center in Tartu, and also being able to talk with people at Ukraina Maya, the local Ukrainian center there in Tartu, and started conceiving of the project that we're going to be discussing now, which is a series of 11 short documentary films with Ukrainian artists talking about how their art form is really serving as a mode of healing, cultural continuation, and integration.
Fantastic. Let's just continue on that line then. I can guess from what you've just said that you met a lot of these Ukrainian artists in Tartu while you were there. How did you choose art, though? Why art specifically in terms of the breadth of Ukrainian refugee experience in Estonia?
Of course. I think that there's probably two main reasons there. I myself grew up in the theater and have been involved in different forms of artistic expression myself. And so it's an area that I am interested in. And I believe in the power of arts as not only entertainment that many people see it, but also as a mode of healing, a mode of communication. And so I already think I had that personal connection. And secondly, I wanted to talk about something that was lasting, that was talking about culture, which is something that is both of this moment, but also draws upon heritage in the past and looks towards the future and defines what is the future. And as I was talking to individuals in the Ukrainian community in Tartu, they discussed how so many people were touching on politics of the region, of humanitarian issues, which are all very important and necessary. But what was something that kind of could be a body of work in a film format that is both very poignant in this time, but also still has relevance or still has something to say even as the future is moving on. And once we move past this awful moment in history, art really became that focal point around the conversations. And also it's helpful as a filmmaker to have something visual or auditory to be able to tell as well. And so it all fit together in one.
So you speak a little bit about the permanence of your art in the films that you've made. There's also the permanence of the art that your subjects are making. Tell us a little bit about those art forms. I know that you were working with different kinds of art, different types of artists who are working in Estonia.
I think the first types of art form that really brought me into this project were certainly traditional styles like pisanka, the traditional Easter egg art that you'll see oftentimes when you're talking of Ukrainian culture, or vyshyvanka, the embroidered shirts, or peterkivka, the kind of floral painting that they used to decorate walls with and now are putting on a variety of objects. And I apologize to my Ukrainian listeners for my pronunciations. And so those were really important for me to discuss. But I think as I was looking at the creative environment in Estonia, I realized that people were taking these traditional forms, not only preserving them, but also now expressing themselves contemporarily with these kind of traditional forms and putting them in digital art, or taking song or traditional instruments and now playing contemporary music. I really wanted to make it my goal to show the breadth of the individuals that I was meeting. So I have spoken with dance groups, with music ensembles, with those doing traditional form, but also those doing this contemporary art form like digital media. I even had a participant who became one of my friends who actually is very involved in calligraphy and using that art form as a means of educating non-Slavic or Cyrillic users about the differences in Russian alphabet and Ukrainian alphabet, because she said for a lot of people that have a Latin alphabet, the sounds and the visual of those languages look similar, and she's interested in showing that distinction. And so I think the variety of art forms was really inspiring to me and necessary to show as well.
I want to touch on something there, which is for this specific artist, there was some degree of importance placed on Ukrainian identity, right, through the Ukrainian language. Was that a theme that you saw across these other artists? I imagine it might be. What were some other common themes that you saw in the course of these 11 films?
Certainly. There is a level of self-definition, right? There's a lot of individuals who know that there is this necessary idea to show what is Ukrainian, not only for oneself. I had some individuals from eastern parts of Ukraine who discussed they knew what they were not, which is Russian, but they were kind of having to learn for themselves and in community what was influenced or told to them by Russia and what was now what they want to define for themselves as Ukrainian, but also likewise telling the world and educating the world about those differences that maybe the world is more unknowledgeable of, and also show the value and the necessity that there is a culture there worth preserving and worth continuing. And then lastly, I think that arts really, for me, was shown to be something that was healing, that these people discussed across the board, these individuals, that art not only was something that they found normalcy in, something of the previous life, or that was solid, that they could really rely on in reality, but also it created spaces where communities could come together and focus their mind on painting, but also discussing similar shared experiences and finding solidarity there in a new community in a new place after horrendous events have happened to individuals. Perhaps one other thing was just a solidarity with Estonians, that Estonians felt the Ukrainians' experience stronger because of their own history with their neighbor to the east and their desire to protect what they now have experienced as independence.
That makes a lot of sense. I can see all of those threads coming up naturally. And these are things that you also discover in the process of being both an interviewer and a filmmaker. Now, I am going to, as an interviewer, ask you a question about interviewing. You're touching on a lot of weighty subjects here, to put it mildly. How do you go about that while also filming at the same time?
Yes, certainly. I think that I was fortunate that the individuals that I was working with were willing to build oftentimes relationships or a conversation even before we clicked record, where we knew each other and we trusted each other. I think for me, it was about ahead of time creating a safe space where individuals knew that whatever they said, they had final editing power on what did end up in the video. And so I think continuing to allow the individuals to have their own ownership of their story. And oftentimes in these videos, actually all but one time, you don't hear my voice. It is always them speaking. And so I think once again, reverting it back to them telling their own stories made me as a filmmaker, and particularly an outsider in that community, feel like I was doing justice to them, but also likewise, I think showing them and having them be a part of that process allowed individuals to also feel like their work was displaying them or portraying them how they also felt. But certainly, I think that there was weighty topic matter, and there were times that I didn't know how to respond. And sometimes that is also as an interviewer learning how to just sit in those situations. And likewise, I think the art did add a means of approaching this topic matter because obviously I did sit down with individuals and interview them. However, I also was there talking with them as they're doing their artwork, and therefore the mind is on the artwork and it allows an individual to express themselves in a different way than if they were self-conscious about being in front of a camera, which is understandably difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to touch on something you've alluded to in the last couple answers, which is the fact that simultaneously you have Ukrainian refugees integrating into Estonia. You are also an American integrating into Estonia. And so you sort of have this parallel process happening. Tell me a little bit more about that parallelism that was going on there and how you managed that.
It was certainly a common point of interest or point of discussion with those that I worked with, just that we discussed how going into Estonia or the Baltics in general, sometimes a stereotype is that people are quieter or they're more reserved. And I just did not find that to be the case for me. I was fortunate I jumped into an Estonian folk dancing group and actually got to go to Tantsupidu this year, which was a joy. But that obviously allowed me to see a different side of Estonia than if I were just a tourist. I do think that I am a very energetic individual, and I think that a lot of the participants that I was working with also felt that they were. And so I think that there was this mutual recognition that we might resonate with each other on that level, where some of our Estonian counterparts might take certain venues to feel that way, just culturally, if you will. So there certainly was that point of contact. But I think that similarly, like I was saying, art was the means by which I chose to integrate, for lack of a better word, into Estonia and feel that I found my place there. And I think that there was a lot of common dialogue around that, as well as for me. I was very fortunate that Ukrainians that I worked with allowed me to also do the art form, right? So I was doing Pisanka or Petrikivka, and I was able to understand when they were experiencing or discussing this process of healing through this or meditation through these art forms. I myself was able to do those art forms, and it, I think, gave me a deeper love and appreciation for this culture that I already knew was important and needing to be preserved and had an interest in, but actually experiencing it was a different level.
So there's this integration happening on multiple levels. But I want to come back to something you just threw in there, which was casually, oh, I just joined an Estonian dance group and went to Tantsupidu. For those of our listeners who don't know, Tantsupidu is the Estonian Dance Festival, part of the larger Estonian Song and Dance Festival. It takes place only every 5 years, so you happen to luck out by being there in the right year.
Certainly.
But a foreigner joining an Estonian dance group is not common.
Not at all.
So you're going to have to tell us more about that. What was that like? That must have been an incredible experience.
It certainly was. When I arrived in Estonia, I knew that Tantsupidu and Laulupidu were going to occur the next summer. And I had actually been fortunate to be able to go to the Norte Laulupidu or the Youth Laulupidu a year prior. And I knew that this was something that I just had to get a part of. I mean, how could you be in Estonia and not? For listeners that don't know, it really is, particularly the song portion, is something that Estonians attribute to a kind of a second national awakening in the fall of the Soviet Union and peaceful transfer of power in Estonia. I tried to find a group, and one of my friends was like, look, you don't speak Estonian yet. Like, everyone's trying to get in. It's going to be difficult. And so I reached out and didn't have any leads. And then one day I was walking out of Werner Cafe, and for those that know Tartu, and there was literally just a poster on the wall that had a folk dancer on it and some pieces of paper that had a number on it. And I later Google translated it because this was literally my first week in Estonia. And it said, looking for a male dance partner. And so I texted my dance partner and said, hey, I don't speak Estonian. I don't know any Estonian folk dancing, but I really want to learn and I'm trying to get involved. And she said, yeah, come to our first rehearsal. And my group just accepted me so well. But certainly they were patient with me. I now can get through an Estonian folk dance class in Estonian, but that took a long time to have the patience on their part to build up to that.
That's pretty remarkable. And I can't imagine. You say you have an artistic background, you have some theater background, so you've got some movement history back there. But Estonian folk dancing is its own thing as well. So that is incredible. So
I
we're
appreciate it.
we're gonna fast forward to Tansupiru. Now you've had months and months of practice, probably close to a year at this point.
9 months, yeah.
9 months. Okay.
Auditions and all of that. Yes.
Auditions and everything. You've gotten up to speed. You now speak enough Estonian enough to get by. What is it like to actually go out and enter and perform in Tansupiru as someone who didn't think he was going to be doing this and as a foreigner?
It truly was the quintessential way of completing my time in Estonia, if you will, as we were rehearsing. So you go to the capital, Tallinn, and you actually rehearse throughout the week. And then you have, I think it's 3 performances, I'm trying to remember. But you get to watch each region's dances before everyone comes together and you do the finale where all 11,000 dancers dance the same song, which is just, I mean, the sense of national identity there and pride. I really haven't experienced something like that in a long time, if ever. It was so cool because each region did have, once again, both these traditional and contemporary songs. And so I was hearing songs of some of my favorite Estonian bands being played on the field as people are doing traditional and more contemporary takes on these folk dances. And so it felt very symbolic of the work that I was doing, but also in this country that I was coming to love. More importantly, I think when I actually was there for the finale, after doing my first Tansubidu, I'm coming down. My group was one of the last ones in the stadium. It's sunset, and so gold is glistening over all the people's heads. And there is something tangible about that moment that I think it can only be understood when experienced. But the last thing that I will say is that for me, what was particularly striking was that you had infants all the way up to elderly who were wearing the folk clothing of their region and feeling that sense of pride. And this wasn't something that was just, oh, we're doing this for fun. No, there was a deep sense of identity and defense in some way, right? Saying we exist and we are here and we are going to live. And I think that resonated with me in line with all of the conversations that I had been having with individuals in the Ukrainian community as well.
It seems like it's a very similar experience in some ways, right? Estonia has been a free and thankfully peaceful country for over 30 years now, since the restoration of independence. Ukraine is currently fighting an existential war. And so the Ukrainians are going through a process that is recognizable in that sense. To wrap things up, you've got these 11 films, you've screened them for the first time earlier this fall. What was that like, first of all, to see the culmination of your effort come together? Does it compare to coming down to the Tansupiru field at golden hour and seeing everyone together, having a project of your own come together and being screened like that? What was that experience like?
Yeah, it was so interesting. There are so many different ways of answering that question, partially because I said I was someone that had been in theater. This is my first film screening, and that experience in itself artistically is very different. But I think that focusing on the response is really what I want to do, because that screening showed me that all my questions of, am I doing justice to all that I have been trusted with, that individuals have trusted me with, and am I being honest to the situation and telling the reality, really was answered for me. I remember one woman stood up who is Ukrainian, but she's been living in Estonia for about 30 years. And she said that she had not seen a film that captured the Ukrainian experience in Estonia so well, or spoke to her identity and her community's identity so well as united the Estonian and Ukrainian community. And I couldn't have asked for any better response, right, from that community itself. It's hard to reflect exactly how it made me feel, because it's both so overwhelming that it kind of did what I wanted it to do, but also there's so much more that I want to do with it as well. And in fact, there were people that were asking, when is the next filming? And I'm trying to figure that out now that I am back in the States, how to continue showing it in Estonia, but also having that conversation with individuals here in the States and showing these films and showing the personal side of this conflict that can be so abstracted for some audiences in the US, so on the news or elsewhere, and also introduce them to Estonia, this place. There is one video in there that I show the partnership between a Ukrainian and an Estonian artist, which I'm very excited to see how people respond to. What I would say is what I took away was an energy and a drive to continue with this project and show it, because I think it's important, and it showed me that it is working in some sense.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad that you got the wonderful feedback, the deserved feedback that you got. And certainly, I think a lot of our listeners are now going to want to watch these films. So tell us where we can find them. Are you going to have more screenings in the US soon, screenings elsewhere in the world? Will they be available online at some point down the road if they aren't already?
Yes, so I should have said this at the beginning. The project's name is Resilient Expression. It will have a website. I'm currently in the process of building that. And depending on when this podcast airs, it will either be up or shortly thereafter up. Alternatively, I will have some screenings actually at Stanford, at the libraries there. We're in conversation. There's a possibility of one in New York City. I will be at the AABS conference in Illinois this May. For the listeners in the Baltic region, keep an eye out in Estonia in particular, probably going to be in Tartu as well as Tallinn again. So lots of options, but for our listeners all over the world, there will be a website called Resilient Expression that will be up soon.
Fantastic. We'll make sure to link that whenever the website is live. I personally am very excited about that. The other thing I'll note, Parker and I had an interview that was published in AABS Annual Bulletin earlier this fall, which has some more detail about his experience both with filmmaking and in Estonia more generally. So if you aren't subscribed to the AABS Annual Bulletin, you can go to our website. That's aabs-balticstudies.org. You can find it there, and you can also subscribe so you don't miss future editions. Parker, just one final question. What's next?
So I think the immediate term for this project is that I'm continuing to find the way to speak on it, to not only make it relevant for Estonian and Ukrainian audiences, but give it the context to speak with my friends and family here in South Georgia, or be able to show it in New York or elsewhere. I think that for me, this project still has a life of its own. I'm in the process of my next job right now, and while I can't necessarily say much right now, there's a hope that I will be continuing filmmaking and continuing to show art and those working in the art sphere, as well as the humanities and the relevance of that work. Once there's more to be said, I will say more, but in the process of finding other ways to continue filmmaking and telling the power of arts, as well as this wonderful Ukrainian community.
Fantastic. Well, Parker, I'm very excited to see the screenings, to get a link to their website once it's ready, and to see what's next in store for you. Thanks so much for joining Baltic Ways.
Thank you for having me, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you in person in May.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Baltic Ways, a co-production of the Association for the Advancement of Baltic Studies, AABS, and the Foreign Policy Research Institute, FPRI. A note that the views expressed in this episode do not necessarily reflect those of AABS or FPRI. To find other episodes of Baltic Ways, you can go to our website, aabs-balticstudies.org/podcast. To learn more about Parker's project, as he suggested, you can Google Resilient Expression. We'll see you next time on Baltic Ways.